Welcome to lawyer Matthew Hague, to Matt and to Skye from our New Zealand Defence Forces. I have to tell you both, I have always admired deeply those who stand for our defence in New Zealand and known that we often offer up the best of Kiwi courage. And to me, the courage to have stood out in this last 12 months and say no, or the last 2 years actually, and say no to a forced medical intervention shows the inordinate courage you two have had in the face of what I now understand to have been incredible forces of coercion. I, as a civilian, am horrified at what I've been studying for this interview. Matt, I just want to begin with you and find a personal note. Have you suffered greatly through this time? And we will investigate with Matthew what exactly you've gone through, but just a personal sense of what you've gone through in the last 2 years, Matt.
There have been times, firstly, thanks for having us on, I guess, and for all the work that you've put into not only our cause, but the other avenues and the exposure that you've personally been working towards. Gives us courage to do what we need to do. To answer your question, yeah, at times there has been really painful periods, and I think I want to make it clear that, I guess we've come to a point now that I'm comfortable with where I am personally with it all, but there were some really dark days where, it's sort of hard to put into words how long it's been going on for, but there were some tough times that you weren't sure, you just didn't know which way was up, really. And it wasn't just me personally, it was how it affected my wife. It's how it affected her business, our different abilities to earn money for our family. We've got a baby boy. And we were having to move houses during this time. It was there were some tough sections of it. So short answer is, yeah, absolutely, we did suffer during periods of this over the last couple of years, more than what most people would realize.
And that is part of the purpose of this interview, Matt, for civilians like me, like all Kiwis, to stand with those of you who've shown such courage, but to first understand what you've been through. How are you surviving now? Are you coming through all right? Have you got other work?
Yeah, absolutely. So no, I'm in a much better headspace now than I have been. Probably thinking a lot clearer as well. If there's one real positive element that's come out of all of this, it's really exposed the lack of leadership, I suppose, or the lack of integrity, the lack of morals and values that we have at the very upper echelon of our defence force. And I think it's probably a very good thing that I saw that now. Otherwise, seeing it under different circumstances may have been a lot more challenging. So I'm very comfortable with where I am personally now, and me and my family are just fine. We're survivors. We push on, and no, we're doing good.
You see, even the courage in your answers shows me that you're the very person that we should have helming our defence force. You have enormous leadership, and I've only talked to you for a few minutes before coming on air and now, but the quality of that answer is extraordinary. How many years service did you give to it? 8 years service, and that's done. Skye, what about you? How many years service have you given to your country in the defence force?
Almost 7 years.
And your story is even more moving. It has hit the headlines a little bit, but it's equally moving, I would say. But you're pregnant. How many weeks pregnant are you?
I'm 35 weeks today.
And you have been got rid of at such a crucial period. That must have caused you enormous stress. How have you got through, Skye?
Yeah, it has been a journey. Kind of along the same lines as Matt at the moment. I've kind of just, I don't know whether it's acceptance or it's numbness, or I don't know, like it's just been so long that I kind of have had to, and obviously I'm having a baby, so I've got bigger things to focus on. But it has been hard. I mean, from in the beginning where they exempt pregnancy, and everyone kind of thought, no, you'll be safe and you won't get kicked out, and people still service people to this day still think that I'm in. They have no clue. They just think, no, there's no way that someone could do that they could kick you out, especially being pregnant. So,
and I talk about
reality.
Civilians being unaware of how much you have suffered. Those of you with the courage to stand up and say, I stand for bodily autonomy, which interestingly is something the Defence Force is meant to defend: New Zealand sovereignty, New Zealand freedoms. You stand for bodily autonomy. Many civilians don't know, but many people in the services don't know how you have suffered. Do they, Skye?
No, like not at all. Not at all, whether it's physically, mentally. Mentally's been a huge strain, especially when it's like the doctors themselves. Like I had initially people thought that I was going to get exempt due to my own medical status before I even got pregnant. I had a large reaction to a vaccine when I was younger. And they all thought, no, like you'll get exempt. There's like no way that they can get you to do it. And then a doctor literally told me on the phone, a military doctor, and just said, well, I mean, you run the risk. It's 50-50, you have to get it.
A doctor said that to you?
Yeah,
Doctor.
that's what a military doctor said to me. And that was the first real hit for me, was being like, wow, no one actually cares. Like, they don't care. And especially, because we were trying for a baby, and then that was another reason. And yeah, so I'm glad I stuck to my guns.
Before we go to Matthew, because I want now to pull out the details of how this nightmare has unfolded for our defence personnel, I do want to ask you about how much you cared about this job. What did this job mean to you, Skye? And then back to you, Matt. What did this job mean to you, working for your country in our defence forces?
Essentially, growing up, it was one of the biggest things that I wanted to do. I kind of never thought about going to university or anything like that. The Navy and being in the ocean was the only thing that I thought of. And yeah, doing something that was supposed to help people, and like that was the biggest part of it, was helping people and doing my part, I guess, being part of something bigger. So to be completely shunned out of that, when I loved my job, I went everywhere that they wanted me to go, went to every ship they wanted me to go, did whatever they wanted. Ironically, I was actually runner-up Sailor of the Year a couple of years ago. And it just shows you that all the commitment that you do, and no matter how far you go above and beyond, it didn't matter. It didn't matter. You were another person. You're just another ant in the ant's nest. And that was a realization that really sucked and really hit home, because you give so much to not only, I guess, your country, but to your people, to the people that you serve with, to the people that you work with. And you end up, they're some of your best friends. Well, you think they are. And then the reality showed of how much people actually cared, whether it was from like top ranks to like your peers around you.
People willing to look the other way, people willing not to speak up.
100% willing to just look the other way.
And let's not forget that in the Defence Force, it's the Defence Force is all about courage, not cowardice. Looking the other way is the epitome of cowardice. Matt, what about you? What did this job mean to you?
Oh, yeah, I invested 8 years, and whilst I knew I was never going to spend my life in the NZDF, I wasn't ready to leave. I hadn't done what I wanted to do, and there was other areas that I wanted to explore, develop, and push forward and offer more service in, and I didn't get that opportunity to finish that. And to leave, I never envisioned my last day in the Defence Force to be the same as I have in the last 18 months and not even receive a phone call from my command chain or from anybody in the NZDF to say, thank you very much for your service. We know that they've left under a bit of a black cloud. And just to get nothing, that's a kick in the guts.
Matt, if there's a black cloud, it's above the upper echelons heads, not above the heads of you and Skye. You
100%.
You clearly come across as absolute people of absolute integrity, absolute courage, incredibly articulate, and Matthew Hague, really good human beings, aren't they? Is this what you're finding in the group who were got rid of recently? And let's not forget, Matt refers to what's coming out in the public domain. We just heard from a Pfizer executive that these were never tested, these jabs, for whether they stopped transmission or whether they were safe. We've got all of this that the upper echelons are ignoring. So Matthew Hague, lawyer, coming to you now, what has been your impression of the people that you are helping, the quality of them?
Well, it's been a real privilege working on behalf of the group. It's been a privilege being trusted with something that's so important to them, the careers of them, the livelihood of them and their families. And it's not always that a lawyer gets to identify with their clients and gets to really respect and like them, but certainly in the case of United We Stand, the men and women in uniform, that's been the case for us.
United We Stand, can you tell us what that is? Let the people of New Zealand know what that is and how we can support. And then we're going to look at the timeline of how all of this nightmare has unfolded. What is United We Stand, Matthew?
Well, United We Stand is a group of New Zealanders. It's unique. The military aren't allowed to have a union or an association. They are unrepresented. There's a word for when a group of members of the armed forces band together in the form of a union, and sometimes that's called mutiny. And so United We Stand is something that's really important, but also really unique. It's this group of like-minded individuals who value the service that they give their country, but want to support each other, want to protect each other, and want to stand up for what's right.
And what's unique about it too is they want to stand up for what's right for them. Moreover, they want to stand up for the very values they're in the New Zealand Defence Force to protect, don't they? They want to stand for freedom, freedom of speech, yes, integrity.
And I think freedom is important to everyone, but it's especially important to the men and women of the New Zealand Defence Force who have their rights limited in ways that members of the public like me and others don't. They aren't allowed to form a union. They don't have unlimited freedom of speech. They get paid below market rates. They are subject to military discipline and military law. All of these limitations that make it even more important to stand up and challenge limitations that actually are unjustified.
And that underline the inordinate courage of you two being willing to speak to me today, because you know those protocols that are so tightly wound around the Defence Force personnel, and yet for all New Zealand, you are standing up to inform us. I thank you both. We will come back to you. But Matthew Hague, we now need to dive into what has been going on and how this case first came to you. And if you could give us a timeline of what's happened so all New Zealanders are aware.
Sure. I think, Liz, it's also important to go back further than that. I think it's important to look at the beginning of the pandemic, and that's in December 2020. And very shortly after the pandemic emerged, the men and women of the New Zealand Defence Force were being asked to support New Zealanders throughout the country, whether it was in MIQs, on the border, right throughout government agencies being involved in planning. They sacrificed a lot. They were away from their families. They were subject to isolation rules. They spent weeks in isolation before they could return to their loved ones. In April 2021 was when the vaccine first became available to members of the Defence Force. So for that year and 4 months, they were working in those MIQ border roles completely unvaccinated with no problem at all. In April 2021, the vaccine became available, and at first there was no mandate. It was something that people were encouraged to have, something that people were able to make an informed choice about what was right for them and their bodies, which is how it should be.
I'll stop you there for a moment, Matthew, because Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister herself, said we will not force this. And many of us replay that horrific verbal evidence of one of the most fundamental lies.
Will people who refuse to take the COVID-19 vaccine be banned from travelling internationally or be on the end of tax penalties, says Dan?
I see no reason to do that. We get up well over 90% for our vaccinations without that, and I believe we will for this.
So will you, in this country, have sanctions against people who don't take or aren't vaccinated against COVID?
No, we haven't done that. As a government, we will not be making it compulsory.
Has the government given any consideration to that, to making vaccines mandatory?
We're not going to do that.
So you basically said this is going to be like, well, it's almost like, you probably don't see it like this, the two different classes of people. If you're vaccinated or if you're unvaccinated, you have all these rights. If you are vaccinated...
That is what it is, so yep.
Two different classes of people. If you're vaccinated or if you're unvaccinated, you have all these rights. If you are vaccinated...
That is what it is, so yep.
I agree, and I remember that too. And it's almost a sense of betrayal that we had our Prime Minister stand up and make that commitment to New Zealanders, and then within months turn around and start removing people's livelihood based on their vaccination status. It was very sad. So in later 2021, the New Zealand Defence Force tried to impose their first vaccine mandate. Now that was challenged not by frontline law but by another lawyer. Before that challenge was heard properly by the High Court, the government imposed the specified workplace vaccinations order. So this was like the vaccine order. It was a law passed by government, but it affected just the men and women of the Defence Force and the New Zealand Police. And in December 2021, that order came into effect. And in January 2022, the order had its effect in the sense that people lost their jobs effectively. They were stood down from their duty if they were unvaccinated. We challenged that in the High Court, and it was a very quick process because of the harm that was being done to people, losing their incomes for them and their families. And in late February 2022, the High Court ruled that the specified workplace vaccinations order was unlawful. It was an unjustified limitation on people's rights, and it should be set aside, and it was. Very shortly after that, the Defence Force imposed another internal mandate, despite the High Court order that the previous government-imposed one was unlawful. We challenged that again, and before that challenge was heard in the High Court, they withdrew it. Shortly after that, they imposed another one. And I think we're up to number 4 now, where we've just gone back to the High Court, back and forth, mostly been successful, although the last iteration we were not successful. The High Court said in September this year that the internal vaccine mandate imposed by the Defence Force was not an unjustified limitation on rights. That's an order that we disagree with, and that's a ruling that we've challenged in the Court of Appeal, and we hope to have that hearing in 2023.
And that seems so surprising that the court would go back on that. Let's just go back to the upper echelons, as we say, of the Defence Force, defying the court and putting it in again and again and again. Matthew, does that not amount to contempt of court? You cannot treat the court's orders like this.
It's not so much a legal contempt of court issue in the sense that each court decision is specific to the order being challenged. And when we were successful in the Yardley case in early this year, that applied only to the specified vaccinations workplace order. So the Defence Force were legally able to impose their own internal mandate. Should they have done so? Absolutely not. This is a time where vaccine mandates were falling away throughout New Zealand. Even the health sector no longer has a government mandate anymore. And for the Chief of Defence Force, Air Marshal Short, to say that it is justified to discharge men and women from their service careers that in some cases they've held for decades is just simply wrong.
And we'll look at the implications of that in terms of the attrition, the loss of our NZDF personnel, which is becoming really serious. But I would ask, in September, when the court then put out this order that seemed to defy all common sense, this was just a week after the government had removed all mandates, wasn't it, Matthew?
That's right. It's a bit of an uphill battle when you're challenging government orders and government regulations. The burden should be on the government to demonstrate that what they're doing is a justified limitation on rights. That's the law. But sometimes when it comes to evidence and challenging the government, it is an uphill battle.
How has this roller coaster ride been for you, Matt? Seeing all of these ins and outs, what was it like watching this?
Well, I'm sorry, is this for Matt?
Well, I'll
Sorry.
just throw it to Matt. I just want to get a sense of the personnel in the Defence Force actually watching your lawyers having triumphs and then disasters. It really is that, isn't it?
Yeah, well, see, the thing is that for somebody in my position, Skye's position, and the rest of our group, which is at one point was pretty sizable, that's now been whittled down because of how as Skye mentioned, the mental strain that it takes on you to maintain this position and to continue. It is really tough, and people might think, you just, oh sweet, you're at home or whatever, but that's not the case at all. So being in this position over the past year and a half or whatever it's been specifically, it virtually feels like every couple of months there's a carrot that's dangled that says, okay, we've got opportunity, it's likely you're going to come back to work. And going back to the very first time that we won the court case, we were told, cool, all right guys, just hang out for a couple of weeks and we are preparing to have you come back to work. That was what we were told from Wellington, from the military, that we were being prepared to come back into the workplace, only to find out that they were doing their best to have another challenge so that we couldn't go back and that we wouldn't go back. And this happened not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 4 times with an appeal. So and it's just dragged on and on and on.
It puts it so well, and many Kiwi civilians would relate to that. Remember, we had the lockdown for one case for 2 weeks, and then it turned into another 2 weeks, another 2. I think many of us recognize that psychological sort of aspect to the operation by the government. Skye, how did it affect you? And here you are pregnant going through this. How did it?
I think kind of the same as what Matt's saying, to be honest. Like, the mental game, like it just felt like I was like, you're just in a game, and that 100% that way of saying it, they just dangled a carrot. They did that so many times. Like, for instance, the first time it happened, my boss in particular said, yep, you're coming back to work next week, like you're coming back, blah blah blah. But the thing that was so messed up is that all of the information was so misleading between the whole force, like the entire force. Like, people were telling you this and people were saying, no, you're not going back. And people were like, no, you're definitely going back. And you're getting this false information constantly. Like, it would even be funny when all these court cases started happening and we started fighting it, is that the information that we would get given from, say, like my command, it was hilarious because they were guessing when I already knew the correct information. So like,
even they within the force that had capitulated to the government demands, they didn't have the full story either.
They didn't have the full story at all. They were guessing and guessing and guessing.
Quite often we would have all of the information far before any of our command chain had it as well, because we would discuss what was happening. It was most prevalent to us to know what was going on, and we sometimes would have the CDF's strategy far before our commanders ever got in touch or sent an email saying, oh hey, by the way, this is what's happening with you next. It's like, yeah mate, we already knew. Thanks very much. They were so far behind. There was such a disconnect in information being flowed down that as lower ranks in the military, we were far ahead of the game than what our own command chains were when it came to understanding how the situation was unfolding.
That's extraordinary. And CDF, just define that, Matt?
The Chief of Defence Force and his office that was feeding down these instructions.
Right at the top. Matthew Hague, this must have been extraordinary to you, because every lawyer in a case has to really immerse himself or herself in the client's situation. You probably went in thinking, oh, this will be very cut and dried being the Defence Force. It sounds like it must have been an education to see this sort of chaos and psyop that was being run. What was your reaction as it unfolded for you?
Kind of disappointment and sadness. I want to believe that the senior leaders in the Defence Force are committed to the same values that they ask the men and women who follow them to follow: courage, commitment, comradeship and integrity. And I would ask the Chief of Defence Force, if he was sitting here today, where is your comradeship towards the men and women that you've removed from service? Where's your commitment to their rights? Where's your courage to stand up sometimes against government and say, actually, this isn't right. We need to do what's right for New Zealanders in the Defence Force and New Zealand as a whole. Because ultimately, the ones who pay the price when we've got record levels of attrition, vacancies across the board that are just not able to be filled, are New Zealanders, everyday New Zealanders who are dealing with bushfires, floods, pandemics, everything that the Defence Force does day to day for New Zealanders all the time. They're going to be less able to do that for everyone, and it's just sad.
I think we need to look at that now too, Matthew, the attrition. Can you spell out for us what you're hearing in terms of attrition of numbers in the Defence Force? Matthew Hague.
Sure. So attrition is at record levels. I believe it's higher than it has been for decades. You only have to look at the newspaper to see the tens of millions of dollars that the Defence Force are having to spend on recruiting and still failing to fill those really critical vacancies. And in the case of Matt and Skye and many other people who have been removed, you're talking about people with nearly decades of service who you cannot simply recruit off the street and put into roles. These are men and women who take a lot of money and a lot of time to train and equip to do their duties.
And this, remember, is when they're being mandated, when mandates around the world have dropped away, when already in New Zealand, people are completely over mandates and the government itself is saying the mandates are over. Matthew, can you take us into this latest court case where the court said these people, this group could be got rid of, as it were? What was the reasoning of the court? It makes no sense to me.
So it's about a 30-page decision, and there's a few different parts to it. But I think one thing that really stood out to me was the Chief of Defence Force saying in court, in his evidence, that it was so critically necessary to be able to discharge unvaccinated people that it justified that limitation on rights. And the Defence Force made a lot of the need to deploy people overseas operationally. And absolutely, look, that's a requirement. You're not in the military because it's an everyday job. You're in there because you need to go into these high-risk situations operationally. But then we looked at the numbers, and the Defence Force's own numbers, which we forced them to release under the Official Information Act, showed that more than a half of the regular force are undeployable internationally. That's more than 5,000 people out of the 9,500 regular force members could not deploy overseas for various reasons, whether it be security, fitness, medical, whatever. And then we looked at the domestic numbers who are able to deploy even within New Zealand to normal roles within New Zealand. And we found that 1/3 of regular force members were unable to deploy even within New Zealand for various reasons. And then you look at the number of unvaccinated people within the regular force, 55. 55 people that the Defence Force thought was so critical to discharge that it justified having a vaccine mandate. And you only have to look at those numbers to know that it was just completely unjustified. It was just nonsense.
Can you explain for me why those other forces are undeployable? I'm not quite clear. You mentioned perhaps physical, what sorts of reasons?
Sure. So to be deployable, there's a range of criteria that a service person has to meet. They have to have the right security clearance. They have to be physically fit. They have to be medically in date. They have to be dentally in date. Their family situation has to be compatible with deployability. So there's a whole range of criteria that have to be met. And what we found was that more than a half of people in the Defence Force do not meet those criteria to deploy internationally, and more than a third do not meet the criteria to deploy domestically. And put those numbers against the number of unvaccinated people, which is 55, and it's so clear that there's actually no justification based on deployability to have a vaccine mandate.
55, what do you think is the amount of money the Defence Force is spending going after these people who have shown such courage? Are they spending a lot of money to take on this continuing legal action?
They are. It'll be hundreds of thousands of dollars in terms of the time that they're spending and the money that they're spending on the various lawyers they've had involved. And this is public money. And it's not just the legal costs, it's the cost of having to retrain people to fill those roles, which actually they're not able to do anyway because there's just not enough candidates to fill those roles. The cost ultimately, though, as I said before, is to everyday New Zealanders who are not going to have the same level of service from the Defence Force that we've come to appreciate. And so next time there are floods, next time there's an earthquake, the Defence Force aren't going to be able to do the same support for the community that they would otherwise be able to.
And Skye, I go back to my opening. I think what I can gather from the notes I've read on you all, and just even meeting both of you, they're losing the best of the best. You strike me as the best, the most courageous, the most moral, and to lose people like you and Matt is a great loss. What has been the story during this period? Have you been kept home during the roller coaster ride? Have you been kept home on partial pay? That psychological operation, have they at least been paying you something while you've been waiting for these results to come and they've been taken from you? What's it been like, Skye?
Yeah, so the whole time we've been kept home, not allowed to go on base at all. I know that other bases, like army bases and things like that, it was different. Some people were initially allowed back on, but with Devonport Naval Base, we weren't allowed at all, even though civilians that were unvaccinated were allowed to go back to work, but just because I wore a uniform, I wasn't allowed on.
Were you kept at home on full pay or part
pay?
Yeah,
so we were kept at home on full pay. And I know for a lot of people and a lot of service personnel and people in general, they will think, oh, well, you've been on full pay this whole time. That's not the point that I think we want to try and get across. Like, yes, I do feel lucky that we have been getting that, but also we have wanted to go back to work this entire time. And that wasn't really our choice. It wasn't up to us.
Yep. I can feel it, that you are men and women of action. You want to be involved. And here you are being neutered, but on pay, as if you're just being kept in this hanging place. Was it the same feeling for you, Matt?
By being away from your workplace and within the standard flow or the churn of the military machine, you're missing out on so much progression. So yeah, sure, home on full pay, that's great, but you're stagnant and you're not as the military is about time investment. So you may as well not be there at all getting full pay, because you're not able to continue that progression in your own career and your own service record.
I imagine, Matthew Hague, part of the PSYOP too as the military is essentially about being part of a group, that body, your brothers and sisters in the metaphorical trenches. So when these people were isolated off, did you hear within the group that you were representing about a lot who were feeling very low, as Matt talked about earlier? At times, he had very dark times.
Look, people in the Defence Force aren't in it for the money. The pay in the Defence Force is significantly below market rates. There's something more to it. There's something about being in uniform. It's the camaraderie with those around you. It's the commitment to something that's bigger than yourself. It's the adding value. It's the service of New Zealand and New Zealanders. This is why men and women in the Defence Force do what they do. And so when you have the Chief of Defence Force limit their rights in an unjustifiable way, actually it makes people question why they're there at all. And so not only are we losing the people that the Chief of Defence Force is discharging, I believe, and I've seen, that we're actually losing a wider range of people. Those are people that may be vaccinated, but have seen the treatment of those around them and suddenly know that actually the reason they're in the job is no longer there. They don't feel that loyalty from senior leadership towards them. And so they question why they're there at all.
Is that what you're hearing, Skye? Are you in touch with, what are you hearing?
100%. I have a lot of friends at the moment that are in that space of leaving. And that is purely not because of, I mean, yes, in a lot of ways, I guess, yeah, it is about money, but the biggest part of it is the way that they get treated, the way that everyone's getting treated. Like, and yeah, what Matthew just said with with the way that people have seen us get treated, the fact that they don't want any more part of this, the fact that now a lot of the time it just seems like a scam. Like, you get sold this courage, commitment, comradeship, integrity spiel when you join, and you love it, and you meet the people, and you love the people and your peers, and then the reality of it is that it's just not like that. I know a lot of people that have left because they just get treated like crap. They're done.
For a civilian, I can imagine that being part of that, almost a family, when you feel you're working to a bigger goal, you would have given your all. But why would you give your all when you see people treating you in the upper echelons as if you simply don't matter?
Exactly.
I'm also horrified, Matthew Hague, at the cost of all of this. I'm glad they were stood down on full pay, but that should never have happened. What an absolute waste of our New Zealand taxpayer money, is it not? I'm trying to get civilians to engage with all of the complex issues here. But this is a government, in effect, that's saying to those managing our defence force, just waste money, waste human resources, and run it down. That's what it sounds like to me. Am I off there, Matthew Hague?
No, not at all. No, look, I think in these days with inflation and the deficit and everything else going on, I think that the government needs to be careful how they spend money, and that includes the Defence Force. They're charged with protecting the interests of New Zealanders everywhere, and to divert money away from doing that towards fighting for an unfair vaccine mandate that actually harms the people that serve them, it's just it's very wrong.
Let's climb back into that nitty-gritty. So on the 19th of September, 2022, we had the judicial review in the High Court. And this was a week after all the other government mandates had been removed. So just take people through that again. In that judicial review, you were representing how many people exactly? Was it 21?
So within the judicial review, there were 4 named applicants, but they were part of a much wider group. I believe that the numbers in the United We Stand group has varied over the months, but it's dozens and at some points hundreds of members of the Defence Force and the New Zealand Police.
Okay, and so what happened there, just to reprise this, because I really want Kiwis to understand, just in the last few months, how brutal this has been.
Yeah, so in late September, the decision came down and the case was called 4 members of the Armed Forces and CDF. So these were 4 named applicants who, on behalf of the group, were challenging the vaccine mandate imposed by the Chief of Defence Force. And in late September, the High Court ruled against the applicants, meaning that the court declined to say that the vaccine mandate was unlawful. Now, that decision is under appeal to the Court of Appeal, and we expect a date in 2023 to hear that appeal.
Which is a long time again to keep these people in suspended animation. Then we have the 7th of October, 2022. United We Stand files an appeal against this High Court ruling. That's what you're saying. And an interim order to block the pending discharge. So that's something to say, take care of your personnel while it's taking so long to get into court, isn't it, Matthew?
So our argument, we said that it was important for people to have access to the courts in a meaningful way. And when you're talking about people's livelihood, they're continuing to have an income. If something happens in 2023, if and when we're successful with the appeal, it might not mean much to people who have been without an income for that length of time. And so it's important to protect the position of those that are affected.
And this was early October, and the termination date hanging over their head was coming up on the 21st of October. So how did that interim application go?
So that was unsuccessful. The High Court declined to order the interim order, preventing people from being discharged.
And that was pushed by the Chief of Defence Force. So it was showing again an absolute lack of heart for his own people.
Yes.
It's heartbreaking. All right, so where we had initially, about 678 unjabbed or unboosted, I understand, in the New Zealand Defence Force back in May 2022. And that's out of 9,200 approximately in the forces. What are those numbers at now? What have they, because we had Matt say before, a lot of people couldn't take the psychological pressure of this, and we can't blame them for that. What are the numbers at now? It's just down to that 50?
Well, as of the date of 19 September, there were 55 unvaccinated members of the regular forces. Now, there's a greater number of unboosted. So when I say unvaccinated, that's people who have chosen not to have the primary vaccination, but there's actually a larger group who have received that primary vaccination, but who have not received the booster vaccination. And of concern, they're due to be discharged in 2023. And so it's not just the 55 that will be affected, it's actually the unboosted. And when we're talking about the justification for discharging unboosted people, we only have to look at the evidence, and even the Crown's own evidence in relation to the effectiveness of the vaccine, and particularly with the Omicron variant and the spread and transmission, it's just not there. And so the justification for discharging unboosted people, it doesn't make sense.
Matt, what are you aware of among your peers? Are many talking about the dangers of the boosters? Because I spoke to an embalmer and a funeral director, Brenton Faithful, a couple of weeks ago, and he's saying it seems particularly these booster shots are very dangerous. He's getting a lot of deaths, 95% deaths from the booster shots. What are you hearing from your former peers?
Going back to the very start of this, I don't think there's one single person that I know that actually were willingly or wanted to get the jabs. Or almost everybody I questioned about it and spoke to said that they were only doing it to keep their jobs. Now, there was a couple of exceptions there, but for the overwhelming majority, they only ever got the one, or that they believed that they were getting the 1 or 2 boosters, the 1 or 2 primary doses. And for what it's worth, I don't even think we should be calling it a vaccine. It did nothing of the sort by the global evidence. It shouldn't even be labeled a vaccine by its own effective status. So the people that did get their primary doses, they were under the impression that, okay, cool, I'll just get it because of the pressure I'm under, and then once it's done, it's done. Hey, the experts are telling me it's fine. Who am I? I'm not a doctor. They know best. I'll just roll with the punches and I keep my job. And after more time went along and more information came out, and we started hearing people that were falling over on the RFL track and were having cardio issues, and people were having some real strange symptoms, more and more people started to really scratch their head and go, oh, actually, I don't think I want to do that booster, when they were under the same level of pressure to get the booster. If you talk to any, I think soldiers specifically have a little bit more of a cutthroat way of being spoken to. And there's a lot of, if you know, behind closed doors, there'd be a lot of soldiers who would probably tell you, oh, if I didn't get it, I would have been humiliated, or I would have been under some punishment. The level of coercion to get those jabs is enormous and quite frankly disgusting.
Tell us more about that. You mean humiliation within their own people from. So went right down the layers.
Absolutely. So I'm aware of instances where people were lined up specifically by their command chain and labeled for not getting their jabs in front of all the rest of their peers, and made to feel belittled and in some cases probably intimidated for not doing so. Because there's this idea, and I'm speaking mainly for Army, the culture is different in the Navy and the Air Force, but in the Army, it's very much a one-in, all-in strategy. And if you're the lone wolf who's going off and doing their own thing, the perception is that you're letting the force down, you're letting your section down, you're letting your platoon down, you're letting you're letting everyone down by not playing ball. So that same level of intimidation and tactics were being employed on young soldiers to coerce people into getting the jabs and also the boosters.
Matthew Hague, will there be future potential for lawsuits from those people who felt that level of bullying? Would that be something that in the future people could take forward?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. The High Court has said on repeated occasions that a vaccine mandate, when it's tied to someone's employment, amounts to coercion. There's no dispute about that. It is a limitation on Section 11, the right to refuse medical treatment, and that's a right that everyone has. The question is damages. How are people being harmed? And that can vary enormously between individuals. Those who lose their income, those who may undergo adverse physical effects. There's a range of different harm that can be done. And so the question of what can people do about it, it does largely depend on what harm's been done. But the underlying wrong, the underlying issue of that unjustified breach of rights is absolutely there.
Have you also looked into Section 83 of the Health and Safety at Work Act and whether people who've been harmed by the jabs, the ones Matt referred to there, who are collapsing on the running tracks, whether they might in future be able to say, you were my employer and you forced me to have this, and because you did that, I can now sue you personally. Some people are saying in future there could be many lawsuits flying against those who enforce the government's mandates.
Yeah, I'm going to give you a typical lawyer answer here, and the answer is probably it depends. In some cases, it may be that the people are working for an employer that imposes an internal mandate, but then they're often getting vaccinated by a doctor somewhere else. And so it might be difficult to link the duty the doctor owes to that individual to the employer's actions in creating a mandate. But in the case of the Defence Force, another unique aspect of them is that they are actually a healthcare provider. They employ their own doctors, they employ their own medics, and the vast majority of vaccinations of service people are done by other service people. And so that connection is much more easily established.
And it needs to be said as well that you are still made to sign waivers. So they have got liability that they can say, oh no, you chose to get it. You knew the risks, but what no one's ever recording is the coercion that goes on behind the scenes in order to get the waivers.
With that situation, Matthew Hague, can one sign, if somebody's having a booster now, because they want to keep their job, can they say, I am signing this, but under coercion against my better judgment? Can one say that?
Look, I would say probably not. Again, it would probably depend on the circumstances, but I would say you can't sign away your rights. You can't sign away the right to refuse medical treatment. You can't sign away the right not to be discriminated against. So to an extent, those pieces of paper are pretty meaningless. The only thing that they might be useful for from the employer's perspective is what information did I provide that person? Were they able to make an informed decision? And regardless of what people say on them, if they haven't provided all that information, and we've heard of recent coroner's case that that information was not provided and an informed choice was not able to be made, the piece of paper is worthless.
And Matthew, you know, in future years, you're going to be a very busy lawyer. You are a lawyer who's getting a wonderful reputation through these dark times. Such respect for the work you're doing. I do want to add that in here. Many people talk about you in glowing terms for the work you're doing. And I think we all want to thank you for standing up for these people. I just go back to you, Matt, when you talked about, what was it, the RFL course? What did that stand for? People collapsing?
The RFL, it's our annual fitness requirement in the army. You have to complete a 2.4 kilometre run in a certain amount of time, and that time is dependent on your age and sex. So it's generally a very cardio intensive activity, which is designed to keep your heart rate at a maximum for a certain amount of time, and it's a gauge of your fitness, and it's a requirement for deployability.
And are you hearing many or just a few are collapsing? Are you hearing those stories?
Yeah, I was hearing people were collapsing, but you know, I've been out of the loop. I haven't been to work. I haven't been on base in over a year. So the only information I get now is predominantly through our United We Stand group, that, you know, other servicemen and women who are in my position. You're largely forgotten about. You know, people aren't ringing you up and telling you what's going on a daily basis on base or within your workspace or within your camp. It's just that you are a ghost now.
That alone is so hurtful, and needs to be put right by those of your compatriots who may now be regretting doing that. Skye, what we have to say, this is hearsay, but Skye, what are you hearing? What have you heard about collapsing or the effects of the jabs on those who stayed behind? Are you hearing anything?
Yeah, especially in the beginning when the first primary vaccinations came out. I personally know quite a few people that had some pretty horrific things happen to them, but because they signed the waiver, they weren't. The NZDF's not held accountable, which is so wrong. And I know it's not even just the collapsing of people; it's women's menstrual cycles. I've got friends and their menstrual cycles are messed up. They're initially friends that have had kids, gotten pregnant super easy before, now all of a sudden have all this fertility issue and treatment and stuff like that, which I think was a big thing with me being pregnant, and that was one of the biggest things with me saying no. But that was also what the NZDF tried to do as coercion, to say, well, do it for your child, do it for your unborn baby. So there's a lot of level of coercion that's not even just do it for your peers or do it for yourself. It goes so much deeper than that. And a lot of it, a lot of these doctors and stuff, a lot of it is not even based on relevant actual factual information. They're just telling you it because they've just been told from the top, from NZDF, from Defence Force and everything, that they have to have the numbers, and it wasn't based on fact or anything. It was just, well, you have to get it, so get it.
And this underlines, Matthew Hague, the ludicrousness of these continued court orders against the personnel when the evidence that's coming up, for example, on stillbirths in VARs in America, a 50% increase. There is the evidence, isn't there, Matthew, to be presented to the court to show the dangers of the jab, the ineffectiveness of the jab, and the wrongness of what they're doing.
Yeah, look, we've seen really clearly that, as with all vaccines, there is risk with the COVID vaccination. But this all goes to underline the importance of the right to refuse medical treatment. It's an individual decision. And I never thought that sitting here and saying what we inject into our bodies should be our choice, and that shouldn't be a controversial position to hold. And I don't know why that's changed. I just think this is a really sad, polarising way that, in particular, the government has driven. I remember Jacinda Ardern being asked the question as to whether some of the vaccine response policies she had enacted created a two-class system, and she said yes. And she acknowledged that that was the effect and that they were progressing regardless. And it's just really sad to see the polarisation, because if there's any group of people that all New Zealanders should be able to get behind, it's people in uniform, people who do the job for the benefit of our community. These are the people that we should be supporting.
And as you said, years of experience being lost, just as we've lost with our nurses, we've lost with our teachers. This is the same pattern playing out. But there's something so urgent about the defence personnel being there for us, should we need it. So where to from here, Matthew Hague? What can we do, and how can New Zealanders help these wonderful, ethical people who've stood up and are still standing up?
Look, there's two things that we're asking people to do. The first is to visit the United We Stand website. Now, this is not the lawyers' website, this is for the group. And there's ways that you can support the group in various ways, but including financially on the United We Stand website. So that's unitedwestand.nz.
And I'll put that up at the end, and I would ask every Kiwi who cares about these people to put in money. It can go to help them personally, but it can definitely go towards helping the ongoing legal costs to stop this bullying through our courts and to put right some of the wrongdoing. All right, that's the first thing. The second thing, Matthew.
The second way is we want to put public pressure on both the Chief of Defence Force, the Prime Minister, but also the Minister of Defence. We want them to hear from all New Zealanders that what they are doing isn't right. We want them to know that their actions are being scrutinised by the public and that they aren't just, that's not in a void, that they are being looked at. And so you can contact the Chief of Defence Force by emailing him directly. It's kevin.short@nzdf.mil.nz. And you can contact the Prime Minister and Minister Peeni Henare, who is the Minister of Defence. Their contact details are on the New Zealand Government website.
Great. And we'll put up all politicians. You could copy your email to all politicians to alert them. But if they get thousands of emails, they cannot ignore this. They cannot pretend they have not been put on notice. What are the main points, Matthew, to hit in an email? What are the things that need to be said, do you think, that are most important?
Tell them what your expectations of them are, why they are not living up to the values that you believe everyone in the Defence Force should uphold, why you think that everyone in the Defence Force are important and the value that you place on the men and women that serve our community. Tell them that you think the vaccine mandate is wrong. Be respectful, don't be abusive, but be direct. Tell them what you expect of them and what the consequences are if they continue with these unjustified mandates. And those consequences may be that political, they may not be voted for in the next election, but also that the senior leadership in the Defence Force, they might lose some of that public respect and buy-in that is absolutely a requirement in modern militaries.
And I would add, it could be good to force, to suggest, to say that you will be pushing, each Kiwi, each one of us could say, we'll be pushing for an inquiry into the utter mishandling of this by the NZDF and the brutalizing of these people. Matt, is there anything else you'd suggest adding into an email? Because I'm going to sit down and write one.
Just your to tack on to what you just said, the continued mishandling of this.
It needs to stop, and stop now. What about you, Skye? What would you like to see written in emails to these people, to our politicians, to the upper echelons, to remind them of their loyalty to New Zealand, to Kiwis, to their own humanity, rather than to an ideology?
Honestly, the biggest one that comes to mind is like, why? Why are you hiding? Why are you not telling people, like, why are you not telling people the right information? Why are you not letting people see these proper statistics? Why are you letting people get hurt? Like, why? That's one of the biggest things that upsets me the most, is like, so many people are getting so hurt by this. Why not say? You know, like, be a decent person and just give people the right information. Back your people. You know? It's not like, it's not the hardest thing in the world.
Skye, if you were the head of this, what would you do right now? If you'd gone right down this path, blindly followed a group of politicians, stubbornly stuck to something, even as the evidence shows that everything you've done is wrong, what would you do? How would you reach out? What would you say?
It's such a hard one. It's just being honest. Like, just be honest. Like, we know all the information that is coming out in the world right now. Just stop. Just give up. Like, apologize to people. Give them their jobs back. Give them their livelihood back. I mean, I've just seen in New York that there's just been a massive thing that all those that were fired because of being unvaccinated have now just been told that all their employers or former employers should give them their jobs back and pay them. Like, the strain that it has had on not only us, but on people around the world is so unfair and so unreasonable for something that doesn't even work. And we know that now. So why are you still holding on? What is it?
It's the crucial question, but for them to be able to say, this is wrong, this has been a mistake, I took the wrong path and I'm sorry. And Matthew Hague, if you were at the helm, what would you say to the people in the forces. What is it that you think the people in charge should be doing now? What should their message be? Yep.
Yeah, just live up to your own values, your own purported values. You know, that you say that you're a force for good, a force for New Zealand. You say that your values are commitment, comradeship, courage, and integrity. Just live up to those same values that you've been talking about for many years. Admit that the mandate is unjustified, withdraw it, apologise, and move on.
Some healing could come from that. So at the moment, Matthew Hague, we have 39 regular force completely unjabbed in the New Zealand Defence Force. 22 are now discharged, as we've talked about. What about the territorial force? What's happening with that one? Are you aware of what's coming up for them?
Yeah, so in December, I believe, is the date that they are due to be discharged if they are unvaccinated. I have heard from some members that that process has begun, and so we'll be looking as to what action we can take to preserve their position pending the appeal. But it affects everyone. It affects regular force, reservists, and it even affects unboosted people.
So the territorial force are going through what Skye and Matt have described, this horrific psyop, this waiting, this hoping, this maybe there'll be a chance, but maybe there won't, wondering what'll go on. That's what's going on for them right now, Matthew Hague.
Yeah, it is. And look, what I'd say about reservists is that they are by definition volunteers. These are people who are not in it for the money, perhaps even more so than the regular forces. They do it. They take time away from their families and friends in the evenings and on weekends. They take time away for their jobs to do short engagements with the regular force. These are people who any other organisation should and would value enormously. These are true volunteers, and yet the Defence Force are discharging those who are unboosted and unvaccinated.
It is so wrong. I would like to go around with a final message from each of you to Kiwis like me who had no idea how much you've been brutalised. I very much want to push that we all give money. Matt, starting with you, would money be a big help? Because all Kiwis who care about our defence will want to help, in some way. Is money one of the best ways, along with those letters?
Oh yeah, look, I mean, the government has very deep pockets because it's not their money to play with. They use the taxpayers' money and for their own end goals. So sometimes you have to fight back in the same manner. And I think, yeah, as Matthew touched on, the best way to do that is just to visit the United We Stand website there, and you'll find the donation if you wanted to support us. For those people that are in service and any civilians listening that aren't and have been made aware of the truth of what's been going on, that's probably one of the better ways to help us lift the veil on what's happening, and to get a really good positive result for us to all move forward on.
And Skye, what about you? What for you the way that we can most help from your perspective? Is it give money?
To be honest, it's more people knowing. It's people sharing these stories and sharing stories amongst their peers, whether it's talking in person or whether it's on social media or anything like that, like sharing these posts from the United We Stand, from Voices of Freedom, from just personal people, like sharing their stories so that people actually understand what has been happening and what's been going on. The money, of course, with the donations is awesome, and because it also, I guess, puts money towards fighting this fight that is still going on, and not only fighting it just for us, but fighting it for everyone. That's how I see it in my eyes. We're fighting it for everyone to make a stand and be like, this shouldn't be happening. Whether that's you're like me and you're completely unvaccinated, whether you don't want a booster, anything, whether you're in the military, whether you're a nurse, whether you work in a cafe, it's fighting that fight for all of us.
Whether you went along with it and now you're jab injured, and you've woken up and you need support, we are all one people, and we need to come together.
Yeah.
It must have been, Matt, quite a challenge to agree to talk publicly, because I know in the Defence Forces that is frowned on. Was it something you had to wrestle with, to be this courageous today?
I don't think it's comfortable, doing these kind of exercises, but that doesn't change the severity or the need to. In the military, you're supposed to have the 4 pillars, 3CI, what we call it. And, you know, one of those is courage and one of them is integrity. And it's doing what's hard and what's difficult and, you know, sometimes what's scary and in the face of what's right, you know, and doing it anyway. And I think it's, you know, it's regardless. This goes beyond me personally, goes beyond Skye and any one of us individually. I'm sure it's the same as why you do what you do. You put your face and your reputation on the line for something bigger than you. It's what we signed up to be service people for. And so whilst it might be uncomfortable when we think about it at a micro level, at a macro level, it's what needs to happen.
What a wonderful answer. Skye, for you, was it something you had to wrestle with to speak up publicly?
No, not at all. I couldn't agree more with how Matt has put it. It just needs to be told. And to be honest, a big part of it for me was the fact that I am 35 weeks pregnant. And I guess standing up for any woman in particular that has been like abused with all of this. And to understand that, like, you know, that it's still going on. But yeah, not just me, not just because I'm pregnant, but just because people need to know the story. And people need to know that it's, to be quite frank, it's a never-ending story. Yeah, I just couldn't agree more with how Matt put it.
I ask a lot of people this, and I'm going to ask all three of you to just look down your cameras and send a message to this Prime Minister. We've had some extraordinary messages. And I think it is that moment where somebody who has refused to listen to her own people, one day, I hope, will have to look at a compilation that we will do of all of these messages. We've done one already, but there are many others to add to that. Matthew Hague, what would you say to this Prime Minister were she to walk in that room right now and be standing in front of you? What would you say?
I'd say put your words, be kind, into action, and think about the men and women and families that are hurt as a result of your government's vaccine mandates.
And Skye, let's end with your message to Jacinda Ardern.
To just stop. Stop with it. Stop with the lies. Just be kind. Show ownership. And yeah, the same as what Matt said. Good luck. Yeah, just good luck.
It's been a real privilege to talk to you both. And Matthew Hague, it's wonderful to see what you're doing. You must feel blessed to be working with people of these qualities.
It's a real privilege. Thank you.
Thank you all. And Kiwis, please support as much as you can financially and with those letters. We'll put those contacts up at the end of this interview. Thank you all.
Thank you, Liz.
Thanks, Liz.
Thank you.